Welcome to Scigest, your fortnightly serving of digestible science from plant and food research.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Scigest. I'm your host, Hilary Ireland. Today on the Science Life for Me series, we have a very special guest, kindly returning from retirement to share her story and wisdom, former intellectual property manager at Plant and Food Research, Sue Muggleston. Starting as a summer student in entomology at DSIR, the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, Sue expertly navigated several career pivots before settling into a key role transforming strategic intellectual property management at Plant and Food Research and its predecessors. Welcome to the podcast, Sue.
Thank you, Hilary. Lovely to be here.
So prior to your retirement, you led strategic IP management at Plant and Food Research, but your career in science didn't start in IP. When did your interest in science begin? Were you interested in science at an early age?
Yeah, I've always been interested in science and nature and figuring out how everything works and just understanding things. So it was fairly obvious to carry on and do science in university, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do at the time, but my friend's sister had done cell biology and that sounded interesting, so I thought I would try that out, and that was a third year major, if you like, so I had 2 years to just put in as many different science subjects as I possibly could in there, everything, biology, biochemistry, chemistry, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, it was just a really fun time to explore all that side of things, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. But then I applied for a summer student position at the then DSIR and started here at Mount Albert working on aphids in lucerne and alfalfa. So that was a really fun summer. And then the following summer, I got another summer student position, this time out at the Pukekohe Research Station. And while I was out there, the person that I'd worked with in the first year came and said hi and said that they were looking for a replacement technician, fill in for a year. And if I was interested, I should put my name forward. And so I did that and came in for what I thought was a 1 year role. And yeah, it's been there a very long time since then.
Wonderful. So how long were you working as a technician?
Probably about 5 years or so. The role was in pheromone research, so insect attractants. And it was actually a really interesting time. I was technician with 3 scientists, a taxonomist, a chemist and a behaviourist, insect behaviourist. And it was the time where we started to realise that working on the New Zealand leaf roller moths, and at that time they thought there were just 3. And when we started looking at the pheromones, discovered that there were many more different pheromone types.
Right.
And so it was really exciting. I got to travel all around New Zealand collecting leaf rollers from all sorts of different vegetation, even got a trip to Stewart Island and
wow, great.
all over the place. So bringing back the insects that we collected and plant material so that we could start learning how to make the different diets for them and then trying to grow them up and get them to mate and produce eggs and things so that we could have an experimental population so that we could look at the pheromones. So it was a really interesting time. But I think it was when I was spending days on end putting tiny first just hatched larvae into tubes of diet, knowing that 3 weeks later I would have to sit there and take them all back out again, that I decided that actually I love science, but I think I enjoyed telling people about science more than I enjoyed actually doing it myself. So that was sort of when, I started to change tack.
So yes, so one of your first career pivots was when you transitioned into science communication. So did you have an expertise in science communication at this time? You recognised that it was an interest area for you, a preference. So how did that evolve?
Yeah, so it wasn't specifically that communication. I went to night school and did some business courses, and then still in the pheromone side of things, I started up a business where we were making and selling the pheromones to the growers so that they could use them to control their crops. So we made up the traps and the lures, and I did a lot of the writing up of the grower manuals and that sort of thing. So starting that tech transfer side of things. And then sometime after that, there was another merger within DSAR. So DSAR
really?
entomology merged with DSAR plant diseases. So we were DSAR plant protection.
Okay.
And I got a role with that working alongside the science group leader. And a lot of that was continuing on writing articles. I had a regular column in one of the grower magazines writing about different pest and disease control and all of that sort of thing, and working at field days and a lot of that sort of communication tech transfer side of things. And then that organisation was only around for a couple of years before it formed the Crown Research Institute. So when that happened, I went into what was Hort Research, and at the time they were looking for a science liaison officer for the site, which was, again, another new role. And it was quite varied, which suits me well, but it was everything from hosting visitors to the site. So we got busloads of Japanese growers who were coming to New Zealand to learn about what went on here, that sort of thing. So a lot of that side of stuff. Still carried on with field days. And I also worked alongside the general manager of the plant improvement group, which was the plant breeding and the molecular side of things. And in that, then I started writing another regular column. It was time for the Orchardist magazine, but that was on plant varieties, plant breeding, some of the molecular things, the science behind it. So that sort of developed. And I guess around that time, we started to get into the genetic modification side of things, and I was involved with a FORCed, which is a precursor to MB, a government-funded science program where they were looking at customer perceptions or consumer perceptions of GMOs. And I was involved as the stakeholder communications side of things, so involved with a lot of people all around the country. And then the scientist who was the leader of that program left, and although there were still other scientists here who were very capable with the science, I ended up running the science program and doing all of the communications and things, and then sort of got involved in a lot more of the communication around GMOs and things. I was involved in putting together an organisation with multi-organisation group, if you like, and we got more funding from the government to go around New Zealand, giving a series of seminars to the food industry on GMOs, and I did the public perception side of that. So, yeah, it was sort of evolved, I guess. I didn't ever have any official training, but I had that interest and sort of, I guess, being able to make science understandable to people.
And really enhancing that, as you say, technology transfer and technology, taking up new technologies. It's a really important role. And so does that, in terms of how the Bioeconomy Science Institute moves forward into the future, how important is it, do you think, to ensure that we're getting full technology transfer from scientific research findings?
I think that's absolutely critical for New Zealand to do that. I mean, why are we doing this research funded by the government if not to have a good impact for the New Zealand economy in whatever way that is? So not everything is commercialised in the way that we might think of it, but a lot of it can just be directly technology transfer across, and that needs planning as well. We need to be able to do that in a way that's going to work.
Yeah. Absolutely, ensure all the ducks in a row so that the technology can be transferred as quickly and seamlessly as possible. So you talked about being involved in the transition to take up the genetic modification opportunity in New Zealand. Thinking back about that time and to now, when we're going through a new stage of acceptance around gene editing, how do you think New Zealand has sort of changed in that time compared to consumer perceptions of genetic modification back then to now?
I think that's a really hard question. I mean, you could be very cynical and say there's not been much change at all because once it was taken off the table, people stopped thinking about it.
Right.
Now, with it being gene editing, which is a much simpler, shorter process than the genetic modification there. There should be less issues, and hopefully that is the way that it will go, because there's some great technologies out there waiting to be utilised for the benefit of New Zealand. But I think the communication is going to be absolutely critical to take people on that journey.
Yeah, 100%, yes. So you were involved in the Royal Commission for Genetic Modification. Can you tell us about your role in that process and then the significance of the findings of that Royal Commission for the science sector?
Well, I think it's a bit much. I was involved.
Okay.
So when I spent time doing the communications around public perceptions, there was a independent biotechnology advisory council that was supporting the government of the day, and the person who was their secretariat working there for the then Ministry of Research, Science and Technology went off on parental leave. And so I was seconded down to Morst in Wellington to take on that role as the secretariat for the Independent Biotechnology Advisory Council. And it was at that time too that they were looking at setting up the Royal Commission. So I was sort of involved a bit behind the scenes in sort of supporting that. But when I finished my role, then I came back to Hort Research and was involved in helping put together our organisation's submission to the Royal Commission.
I see, right.
So, yeah, I got to talk at a Parliament Select Committee at one stage, and actually did some presenting at the Royal Commission of our subject matter, and did all the collations of the Hort Research's submission. So that was, quite an exciting time, and I think important. And although it was a bit disappointing in that it effectively stopped the research happening in any meaningful way, in terms of getting things out there, it hopefully has given that time for pause and allowed the country to know that things are being done thoughtfully.
Yes, that's a nice perspective, a silver lining, if you will, on what can be seen as putting us back a few years, I suppose, at the time. So how did these experiences lead eventually to a pivot into intellectual property management?
Well, I guess just before I went down to Wellington for the secondment, there was another restructure, not a merger, but a restructure within Hort Research, where they went from being discipline-based, so we went from being plant improvement to then being sector-based. And so the general manager that I'd worked alongside then became responsible for kiwi fruit, citrus, subtropicals, that side of things. And I was really sort of struggling to find my feet in that area. I did do a 6-month position where I did a portfolio manager role, again covering a parental leave time. Then while I was down in Wellington, it was when they were just starting to set up our new genomics platform at Hort Research. And I felt that was really where I wanted to be, because it fitted with my history, my training and those sorts of things. So I rang them up and said, I really want to be involved in that. What could I best do?
Nice.
And the response was, so the best thing that you could do for us would be to set up a system to manage the patents that would hopefully be flowing through from the program. And so I came back and started doing that. And within about 3 months, it's, could you do that for the rest of the organisation as well? And then it went from there.
Wow. Even though we're only part way through your journey, it strikes me how you had real clarity in what you did and didn't want to follow in terms of the endeavours, such as, looking at the insect larvae and the process involved with that, and knowing that, it's okay, but, you'd rather be doing something else, and then having a bit of a lull around the focus of your work and the portfolio manager, and seeing an opportunity and having real initiative to go and pursue that. Has that been a hallmark of your career as you look back at it?
I think, I'm not so sure about the clarity, but the willingness to take new opportunities and to try new things. I think for a long time, as every time we had a restructure, I got a new job that hadn't existed before.
Right.
Some of them I put my hands up for, other ones I was tapped on the shoulder for. But I think, it was always that interest in science and seeing it get out there being used. And back then we didn't have a lot of commercialisation or anything like that. So there was a whole lot of new things that hadn't really been thought about or done. And I was always quite willing to take on things that other people weren't doing, wasn't part of their roles. And so just sort of looking for new opportunities, and did always want to come back to something I was interested in.
Yes. Well, and thank goodness you did, because transformed Plant and Food into the IP expert it is today. So thank you for that. When you went into IP management, you started with the genomics platform and establishing the patenting process for that. So it sounds like there wasn't a lot of IP management going on. How was IP being managed when you first started working in the area?
I would probably go as far as to say it wasn't being managed.
Right.
We did have a reasonable number of patents that had been filed, but when I dug further into it just to get copies of them, because we as an organisation didn't even know what we had. There was no central record of any of that, and it was all being done quite individually, usually by scientists going with a range of different patent firms, and they were being filed primarily to support funding proposals. So to indicate that there might be something exciting coming out of this because it's warranted filing a patent on. Many of those didn't go any further or were just withdrawn and refiled again so that we could still say that we had a patent application in the next funding round. There really wasn't any further thought given to them once they'd been filed. The science went on, but there was no development side of things, so most of them couldn't be really taken forward. And then with the few that we tried to resuscitate, we discovered that mostly things had been severely compromised by the time they came to looking at commercialising it. So you'd either disclosed it so you could no longer protect something, they'd used materials or methods that were, say, for research purposes only, so then you couldn't use them for the more commercial applications. Maybe there had been contracts that had been signed that gave away essential parts, or maybe contracts that hadn't been signed where they ought to have been, and there were total lack of clarity in who owned what or what they could actually do with it. So really hampering our ability to do anything at all with them. And so, you know, if we really were going to be serious about wanting to get some commercial results from things, I felt that we had to start right back at the beginning and make sure that we weren't, you know, cutting ourselves off at the feet before we even started. So that was when I started to try and put a bit more structure around that. And certainly in the early days, it was very, very hard to get any traction. And I think the biggest step forward came when I convinced the organisation to say that no contact should go to the patent attorneys except through me or our team. And we had to talk to the patent firms and tell them that was a policy and they should turn the scientists in our direction. So it took a while to actually get that to embed. And then we started to try and get some policy and things around it so that we were filing things on things that we were actually going to take forward and actively commercialise and be worth the money that we were spending on them.
Yes, right. So starting at the beginning, what did that entail in terms of engaging the science teams?
Okay, well, early on, it was very new to everybody, and I think there were about 3 other people in New Zealand with the term intellectual property manager, and we all did very, very different things. And we sort of went down the education pathway. But back then, it was very much about just teaching people about, you know, what was a patent and what was the patent timeline and, you know, what was a trademark and the sort of the nuts and bolts of patenting and things. And although it covered, you know, what you could protect, like you had to be novel and inventive, those sorts of things, but it didn't really touch on what people were doing in a way that they could understand.
Right.
So we did a lot of these seminars all around our sites throughout New Zealand, and I think most people had either then thought, right, I know about patents, so I don't need to think about it anymore. Or I'm never going to do a patent, so therefore I don't need to think about IP.
Right.
And so it really wasn't getting that culture change that we needed. Mm-hmm. And so it was about that time, I think, that MB or Morst or whoever the science organisation at the time was, they started requiring IP plans as part of their funding proposals. And that was the perfect time to come in and engage right at the very beginning of the science program and its development. And so we started interacting with people there and really getting them to include patent searches along with the literature searches so that they knew what was out there, to look at the materials and methods that they were using and making sure that there weren't any restrictions on those. Had someone patented them? Did they need a license? Were they for research purposes only? All that sort of stuff. And then who else were we having in the program? Were there going to be students or collaborators or overseas parties or whoever? And had we got the right agreements in place with them to enable us to do what we were planning to do at the end of the program with it. So that was a real...
That is a cultural shift.
Yeah, a real cultural shift. And I think from then we were really able to build on that and start bringing in some new language. So people were still thinking IP being patents and, the more formal protection. But if we change the language then to intellectual assets, which is basically bundles of knowledge, and so everybody needed to think about the bundles of knowledge that were coming out of their research and how were they going to manage them to get the best result that they could, whether that was deciding that that was going to be a publication or whether it was going to be transferred to New Zealand kiwifruit growers or whether it was going to be commercialised through an external company. But really planning those through and making sure that the way was as clear as it could possibly be. And I often had the challenge back that if we knew what we were going to produce, it wouldn't be science. And I would come back and say, no, you obviously don't know exactly what it is that you're going to discover. But we know what you're aiming for, a method of doing this or a compound for that or a formulation for doing something. And so you can plan towards that and make sure that you are going to be able to do something with it out the other end. So it was really engaging people at that early stage, helping them to understand that IP or intellectual assets really were important to manage throughout that process so that they could get impact or commercial success from the work that they were doing.
Yes, it is such a shift in the way we do science, really, from the science side to think of the long-term vision for, especially at the foundational or fundamental science end. Sometimes that vision requires a long time horizon in terms of the eventual impact or technology transfer. But probably now more than ever, we need to have that change of culture where we're thinking impact first.
Yes, and I think too that the government had changed along this timeline as well as to what they wanted out of the science organisations. So as we went from DSIR to the Crown Research Institutes, that was the first sort of change, but it wasn't really clear what commercialisation was. And then we came to the much more commercially aligned or orientated focus of our funding and wanting us to get more out of it. So having to change people's perspective along that journey as well as the government changed.
Yes, well, a government change helped back in the time when you really needed people to think about IP, with the requirement for IP planning for funding. And so it really can have a massive influence, well, and should, I suppose, for a government public research organisation. So looking back at the key changes in strategic IP management that you and your team implemented, what do you think has been the secret to making PFR the IP expert it is today? Is it all about that early engagement and education, or is it partnership and collaboration? What's the secret?
I think it's a combination of all of those. So I've always thought that our role was to bring together the the three strands, if you like, the science, the IP and the business side, because if any of those get out of kilter in the process, you can get, for example, having to make very expensive decisions on a patent before you have even worked out where you're going to commercialise it, or the science hairs off in one direction, but that's not where the business need is. So trying to keep those things aligned. Often too, when you start protecting a new science discovery, as it develops into something that can then be a commercial product, it may change considerably in that time, and we have to keep a real close eye on it to make sure that our patent or other protection is still covering what it is in the commercial embodiment, to use the jargon there. So I think as an organisation, making sure that we do have business, commercialisation people who are focused alongside things that we choose to protect, and that we can all work together on getting that best outcome.
And is there anything that you see that we're doing well at Plant and Food Research, or as the Plant and Food Research Group within the Bioeconomy Science Institute, that you would want to see continue and build upon, things perhaps we could do better even in this new future of the public research organisations?
I would hope that the processes that we've put in place in plant and food research can continue. I think it's a long time to make that culture change, and we often hear the term a 10-year overnight success for a new product getting out. So there's a lot that needs to put it in place, and I think getting involved very early on in the process should help ensure that it's a smoother path throughout that journey, making sure that you have got the commercialisation managers on board early on as well means that we can make sure that things are targeted at the best market. Where you made the discovery, the field that you made the discovery in might not be where the ultimate best market is. And sometimes we have to think outside of our organisation or our sectors that we work with to think that actually this has got an application somewhere else. So aligning all of those things, making sure that the success takes time.
Yes.
And if you keep making changes, then you're going to lose that momentum of the good things that you've put in place in the past.
Right. Yes. So we need to keep the momentum up. So thank you for all of the effort that you put into that. So switching gears a little, you've been president and trustee on the board and long-standing member of LESANZ, the Licensing Executive Society in the Australia New Zealand chapter. Can you tell us about LESANZ and your contribution to the organisation?
Yes, so as you said, LESANZ it's, if you like, the professional society for commercialisation of IP, and it's part of a global community, so there are LESANZ chapters all around the world, and it really is part of that empowering people in that industry. And I guess it's nice because it's a very broad spectrum of people in there. There's everything from commercial lawyers to patent attorneys to commercial managers to people at universities, CRIs, companies, the whole spectrum. And it's more about sharing learnings than anything else. So it's a really friendly grouping. We have a regular annual conference and also have a lot of training programs and seminars and webinars and that sort of thing. And I had been involved in plant and food research. I had set up a core business skills program to try and increase the awareness of all things business to people, and sort of expanding on that, worked with LESANZ to initially deliver an international training program on licensing IP, and then it was very Northern Hemisphere US centric. So we, as part of my time on the Board of Trustees, was as trustee for education, and we developed 2 training programs ourselves. one on the fundamentals of IP and one on intermediate licensing course. And we have now delivered that to over 300 people throughout Australia and New Zealand. And in New Zealand, we partnered with KiwiNet, which is the organisation of most of the CRIs and most of the universities, to try and enhance our commercialisation activities. And so being able to sort of contribute that learning around licensing and IP into that wider community was, a great delight. And somehow I got my arm twisted up behind my back to move from being the trustee for education to being on the path to being president. And so, yes, I've just completed a 2-year term as president of LESANZ.
Wonderful. Congratulations, for being able to take that role on, and thank you for performing the role. Are you still engaged with the organisation?
Yes, so I'll have another 2 years as immediate past president on the board. So we'll stay involved with that, and there's a great group of people. So yes, I do hope to stay well connected.
Yes, so as well as transforming Plant and Foods IP culture, you've been transforming the culture around IP protection throughout Australia and New Zealand as well. So thank you for all that you've done in that space. And I am part of the alumni of the core business skills and highly rated it. Really was important for me to learn more about the plant and food way of doing things, and especially important as a scientist to understand the importance of thinking about the future of the research that you do and how it can have impact. So looking back over your career, what advice would you give to people who are interested in starting or perhaps pivoting into a career in IP management?
Well, maybe I could broaden that, not necessarily to IP management, but to a whole range of activities that are out there beyond straight science at the bench, if you like. That there are a lot of roles that require the knowledge of science and the ability to communicate it or understand it or work with people in it. There are lots and lots of different roles, and if you have interest beyond that, is to look for opportunities, do courses, put your hand up to be involved in different things so that people are aware of what it is that you want to be doing. Because at one stage I didn't think I would be qualified for a business manager role, which I did alongside the IP side of things, but a mentor of mine and my boss at the time, they basically gave me a click up the pants and told me I needed to apply for it, and I got the role. And so they only knew to do that because I told them where I wanted to go. So
Right.
enlist people around you to help you get where you want to go. And for me, there wasn't ever any one particular aim, but I wanted to just keep doing things that I enjoyed that were useful. And then they've all sort of coalesced together. And eventually this role seemed to have brought together all of those learnings.
Nice. So there's definitely an element of having a vision, a broad sort of idea of where you want to go, even if it's maybe short term, and then networking and communicating that.
And taking opportunities.
Nice. Wonderful advice. So lastly, when you look back at all of your achievements and the impact you created in the New Zealand science system, what are some of the things you're most proud of?
I think I'm actually most proud of the people that I have enabled along the way, because as well as the core business skills program that we discussed, I had also been supervising master's students in several different business programs at the University of Auckland over many years now, and brought many of them in as interns into the organisation, summer students, employed some of them in the team, and really tried to create a career pathway which really didn't exist, certainly when I started in that, so that there were jobs that they could have and progress in without having to leave and move on to another organisation. So bringing good people in and training them up, and then many of them are now out there in the wider ecosystem, making New Zealand's science commercialisation a success. So I guess very proud of all of those great people that are out there now being able to do things for New Zealand.
Yes, a wonderful thing to be proud of, and you really did pay it forward, really, back from when you started as a summer student to creating all of these new opportunities for young people to come into the industry. So well done.
Thank you.
So it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today, Sue. Thank you for returning from retirement to share your story and wisdom. I'm certain I speak for the entire PFR family when I say thank you for your significant contributions, which transformed Plant and Food into the impactful organisation that it is today and will continue to be under the new BSI banner. So thank you, Sue. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you out there for listening. If you'd like to know more about the topics covered on Scigest, check out the episode pages on the Plant and Food Research website. Please also subscribe to or follow the Scigest channel and rate and review each episode. Why not give it 5 stars? Thank you and mā te wā.